My name's Chuck Duprey, president and founder of Naturcycle. I've worked in the compost industry almost 15 years now, from selling compost to manufactured soils to working with contractors to better utilize and apply compost in a variety of erosion control and other methods. So today we're going to take a brief look at surface applied compost, as they call it in New York State, or what would more commonly be called like an erosion control blanket or berm application for stormwater management. For educational purposes, we're going to look specifically at New York's specification for surface applied compost, which is an erosion control spec. Vermont doesn't currently have something this specific, but New York offers through their Department of Transportation a very step-by-step process in which you can go through and follow as the contractor or municipality or authority, the process of applying compost for surface application. What's critical to take away here is that any specification for the use of compost heavily relies upon the compost material specification. The New York specification, the first thing off the bat is it gives you the description of the job and what you're going to be doing, and then the materials you're going to need. So what it references there is that there's a specific type of compost in a specific additional specification area the New York State calls type C, an erosion control compost, that coarser, more mulch-like compost material that gets used in this specific application. So from that, once you make sure you've got the right compost, which is the critical first step, they actually go through what the specs call construction details. They give any preparer the specific steps they would need to follow. So in this case, they actually go through and talk about placing the material. So they'll talk about prior to placing the compost, you should prepare the area, how you prepare the slope or the flat area that you're trying to revegetate, some sort of roughing or scarifying, removing large debris like a stump or really big rocks, and then tracking the material to create a more even pattern. For very steep or inaccessible areas, they have a slightly different specification, and then smoothing of the slope is not permitted. The idea here is that you're going to use the compost to grab onto that surface and create a 100% contact application. That a smooth area is not actually good to get that contact. You want a rougher, more bumpy surface that the material can adhere to. So then it gets into, again, very specific. They even tell you how they're going to apply the compost, that the contractor will evenly distribute this material in a variety of different ways. They give you some different examples, like a pneumatic blower unit, which is like a blower truck, side discharge manure spreaders, anything that'll propel the material on the side of the hill, some sort of loader or bucket truck that you can gently spread the material. Again, they give you very specific options that any contractor could follow. They talk about watering thoroughly. That would probably be very useful if you're going to vegetate the surface and spread seed on it. Continuing on with their specification, they talk about where appropriate, and again, this will be up to the designers, potentially tying in other structural or erosion control methods like a jute mat or other blanket type applications if need be, depending upon the slope. Then they talk about how they're going to measure this installation from a cost and budgeting standpoint, that they're going to do it based upon the cubic yards to be applied. So if the DOT was bidding it, they would say the slope is 1,000 feet square and it's going to need 50 yards of compost, and they would bid the project based upon the cost to install that 50 yards of compost. So any contractor, be it maybe somebody using a blower truck or someone using a slinger or even just their excavator with a long reach bucket, can price it out as best they feel to achieve the goal, and then how they talk about the basis of payment. It's pretty standard DOT spec. This is the current models that Vermont or New York or New Hampshire uses, but this one is very specific to erosion control compost application, not currently in your specs, but an example of what it might look like in the future and how you should follow those steps. And again, something this specific, most contractors at any level could follow these guidance and come up with a way to price it out and then with a way to install it.
And is the spec, Chuck, the one that's referred, is that one of the ones that we shared?
Yes, the Type C is one of the ones we shared for an erosion control blanket.
Okay.
They call it specifically Type C in the New York specs, but you could just substitute the word erosion control blanket compost and get the same result.
Okay.
They just use letters for ease of flow.
Mhm.
Again, if I was redesigning specs for a state, I'd probably do something similar, just because then there's no confusion about which compost you wanted,
Mhm.
and it flows through. But the real basis of the design is having that compost spec, because a very fine compost would actually fail in this application. It absorbs too much water. It can cause sloughing, which means it puffs up and slides.
Mhm.
That's why you keep the hillside rough, and that's why you use a coarser compost. You want it to slow down the water as it falls on it from rain and break it up and absorb some. You don't want it to just suck it all up like a sponge. I think that pretty much describes it. I'd love to see the state just, obviously make their own modifications, but
They could essentially lift this.
yes, and they're all AASHTO based.
Mhm.
This is all
Okay.
from the association, so there's no
Yeah.
real ownership. I wouldn't take every word for word. I don't think they'd
Mhm.
love that, but
Right.
you could very similar take a lot of it.
Yeah.
And adopting the types of compost, I think, is going to be important for the future. I think that would really clarify things for you guys. I don't care if you use numbers or letters, but
Mhm.
something that says type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, as many types as you feel you need, but then there's no confusion from an installer standpoint or from a landscape architect. I see landscape architects use this a lot, again, because it avoids any confusion. Because if
Mhm.
you say, I want type A compost for those planting beds, DOT type A, there's no, some contractor can't claim I didn't know where to find it. I don't know what you're talking about. It's a DOT. It's as readily available and widely used as possible.
And so then do you think that also helps on the producer side for the compost or people who are doing the compost blends because
Yes,
it's
that's a very good point. It gives them a consistent goal to achieve, publicly available specifications that anybody of any scale can access online. It really helps overall, I would say, develop markets, because you've got a consistent common language that then you can follow. Architects of all scales sometimes like to modify things to their project needs, but at least if you have a basic starting point, someone looking at doing a compost site or growing their compost site, expanding it, it gives them options and they can see what's in the market. If everyone's writing their own spec every time at every level, that's very hard to build markets, standards that everyone's using. It'd be very tough to sell cars if everybody didn't have some common language on, four wheels is the preferred model. Usually, the things that are common, that some of that's not as codified. My example's not great in that sense, but maybe, nutrition labels, I think, is a big one that gets used often, that you
Mhm.
can look at that label, and even if it's a Oreo or a Hydrox cookie, I can compare the two on a nutritional standpoint, at least, because it
Mhm.
talks about the ingredients and the results.
Great. Thank you.